Are you tired of the same old pro wrestling? Then check out the amazing action on Powerslam.tv, the biggest indie pro wrestling channel in the world. Get over 3,000 hours of the best pro wrestling events from over 100 of the biggest names in the industry from over 15 countries around the globe. Get your free trial today at Powerslam.tv.
And welcome to another edition of Glove Up or Shut Up on AngryMarks.com. My name is Steve Jewin, and I'm not joined by Peter H. tonight because he took a medical transport. Unfortunately, our co-host is down with a concussion. We wish him a speedy recovery from that. But joining me on the line tonight is our planned guest, the one and only Todd Martin.
Yeah, thank God for that. I hopefully Peter is feeling better soon. That's sad to hear, and I'm glad you had me back after I took the shut up option last time with the show. Didn't go very well, but thankfully you decided to have me back anyway.
I'd always have you back, Todd. There's never any worry about that, even if you had a concussion, although I would understand if you wanted to bow out for that, because Peter certainly did. So anybody that has a concussion deserves plenty of rest, and I think that goes for mixed martial arts as well as podcasting.
Yeah, I think even more so in mixed martial arts. I think it's a bit of with the podcasting, I think you can survive with getting punched in the head. Probably a substantially worse idea.
Well, I won't name any names, but there are a couple of podcasts I've listened to over the last 10 to 15 years where I thought, was that person concussed when they recorded that show? I don't know.
Yes. What can you do?
Yes, indeed. But what can we do about UFC?
I wanted to come up with a name there that would be like for the joke, but I wanted to come up with someone that was so ridiculous nobody would take it seriously or think that it was a serious dig. And the names that went through, I was thinking, maybe people think that Todd's trying to bury this person. I was like, I'll let it go.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I was just going to leave it to the imagination of the listeners. But one thing that won't be left to the imagination is the finish of UFC on ESPN, because controversy. Was it stopped too early, Todd? What do you think?
No, I really didn't. I mean, a lot of times when we have these discussions, over the years, there have been plenty of discussions about whether fights were stopped too early. And on a scale of discussing whether it was stopped too early, this one to me is like on the very, very far side of no, it wasn't stopped too early. Because I don't think there's a very good argument at all that it was stopped too early. He was rocked repeatedly. He was repeatedly getting lit up for the entirety of the fight. I thought that the referee protected him from himself. I thought it was a good stoppage. I didn't see the controversy at all, frankly.
The way I was looking at it from my vantage point was every time Dillashaw moved like he was going to get up, Cejudo creamed him with another right hand, and he just kept getting, like you said, lit up repeatedly. And when the referee stepped in and waved it off and Dillashaw started to protest, he was staggering. He was not standing up straight saying, I'm fine. He was like wobbling back and forth. And I'm like, no, dude, that was the right call. You can't even stand up straight right now.
Okay, good. Because I didn't want to impugn people too much for having that opinion, and then have you immediately say, "Well, I thought that it was a bad stoppage." After I said that anyone who thinks so is either biased or an idiot. No, I didn't see the argument.
I don't think anybody is an idiot for having that opinion, but I will say that the commentators who reside in certain message boards are very passionate about letting fighters fight, and they're like, "How dare you stop that fight? Dillashaw wasn't done." And I'm sitting here reading this, trying to be like open-minded about it and looking at the fight again and again and going, no, I don't see it. I'm seeing what you people are upset about because you want the fight to go longer than 32 seconds, but it's just not there.
Yeah, I thought he did give him multiple chances. I mean, it wasn't like it was just one sequence. Like he was in trouble and then he tried to recover and he was and then he started staggering back, and Cejudo was pouncing on him again when it was stopped. So yeah, I thought it was a fine stoppage.
It happened so fast that it's honestly hard to break down into the minutia, but there is a point where you can look at Dillashaw as he's on his hands and he's trying to sit back up, and Cejudo creams him again and he falls back, and it's like, okay, you can't you can't get away from this. There's nothing saving you. Every time you move, you're going to get nailed again.
Yeah, it was just a bad night for Dillashaw. I was surprised. I was expecting Dillashaw to get the better of Cejudo pretty handily, most likely. I mean, it wasn't like I was shocked by any means, but that seemed to me the most likely outcome, and it went the exact opposite direction. It was, I think, a big setback for Dillashaw, who'd been looking great going into that fight. And Cejudo, while a very skilled fighter, is not somebody who's boxing, by the way, has really improved. That's been the case for a few years now. But he really got to show it off on Saturday. But anyway, in spite of those factors, Cejudo's never been a guy that's flashed a ton of power. And, Dillashaw was having trouble every time he seemed to land.
Two different directions we can go from that, and the first one I'm going to go is, you said it ruined TJ Dillashaw's plans, but I think it also ruined Dana White's plans, because I believe he wanted this to be the end of the flyweight division.
Well, I mean, look, as somebody that's also an advocate of ending the flyweight division, it still can be. I mean, he doesn't have to give up on this plan. In fact, I would suggest Dana don't give up on this plan. You can still kill the flyweight division; it'll be fine. But yeah, it certainly complicated matters. I mean, Cejudo looked great in the fight. I mean, I think it's going to create more, more public demand for potentially continuing the division. And aside from that, I mean, I guess in terms of the fights, it can go different ways because, you could just do the rematch still at bantamweight between the two for the bantamweight title and then, fold the division still. And I think there's still a good chance that they'll do that, but I think they also could, it could also lead to second guessing of the decision. I mean, they've got flyweight fights on the calendar. This raised the stature of Cejudo. Maybe they figure, well, maybe we can, make something of this division with Cejudo being the guy on top rather than Demetrius Johnson as before.
Right, and that does bring up Joseph Benavidez, but I want to get to him in a second, because the other direction that I went from what you said about the fight was TJ Dillashaw, it spoiled his plans because he came in looking great, under the weight, was the first person to step on the scale, was all smiles, was telling everybody about his big plan to take over 2 weight classes and be one of the few guys to do it, and yet now the question is, did he lose something trying to get down to 125? Everybody thought, well, okay, he's got this nutritionist, he's got this great plan, he's obviously making the weight with no problem, but maybe there was a problem. Maybe we just didn't know that he was losing a lot getting down to that weight.
I mean, it's certainly possible. You have to look at that possibility. But hey, I mean, Dillashaw's a guy that's had surprising setbacks in the past. I mean, this, sort of at intervals over time. I mean, the Rafael Assunção upset, the Cruz fight was an upset. The Dodson loss was the one that was probably most similar to this. So it isn't like this thing is unforeseen in the past in terms of Dillashaw's history. And I think at times there can be an overblaming of an overusing of that whole excuse excuse is probably wrong, but like when a guy looks either better or worse, they say, the division was the key. And a lot of the times I think the division ends up not being as big of a factor as it's made out to be. So, my natural inclination is to be a little bit hesitant to make too much of that, but I mean, certainly given the nature of the performance and the way that he looked beforehand, I certainly don't think you can dismiss offhand the notion that that played a significant role.
I do think there is possibly merit to it, but I do also think some people will use it to try to take credit away from Cejudo, like, oh, you just caught Dillashaw when he made a bad decision. Well, if that was the case and that's what you really believe, that would be exactly the reason to do this rematch at 135 and go, well, if it hurt Dillashaw going down, see if it hurts Cejudo going up, see if it's the exact same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that being used as the selling point. Yeah, I could see that.
One thing that wasn't a selling point about this card was the co-main event. And honestly, I'm glad the main event ended in 32 seconds in a decisive manner, because up to that point I had a really sour taste in my mouth from watching Alan Crowder and Greg Hardy.
I guess I didn't as much as a lot of people seem to. I mean, certainly there's the argument for bringing like Greg Hardy into the UFC in the first place, and I get the argument. Given the past history, I'm sympathetic to that. The fight, I mean, yeah, he threw an illegal blow, but it's a it is what it is. I mean, we've seen illegal blows in MMA before. We'll see them again. It didn't. There's nothing about it that struck me as like it didn't bother me. I mean, it certainly wasn't a satisfying finish, and certainly a lot of people didn't like the idea of Hardy being there at all, particularly given the fact that Rachel Ostovich was fighting on the same card. But I don't know, it didn't create a sour taste in my mouth.
Well, I think the commentary team raised a valuable point for me, and hopefully a lot of other people considered it as well, that if Greg Hardy had one chance to prove his worth on the big stage, he just blew it in spectacular fashion. This was like his chance to show everybody that he's not the guy who did all these things back when he was in the NFL, and instead he made a poorly timed decision, whether or not it was Alan Crowder talking trash to him or whether or not it was just lack of experience. Either way, he blew that opportunity to get a new audience that sees him in a better light by proving he could win a fight as a professional.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it was bad in terms of a public perception standpoint, regardless of sort of what happened in the fight reflected upon him, and even putting aside the fact that it was different in kind from the issues that he'd had before. Still, for people that were going into this thing thinking, I don't like Greg Hardy, I don't like him being in here, I would wish he'd just go away. I think he's a jerk, or worse. I think that the nature of the fight here created a further negative narrative that I think it's going to be difficult to overcome, because he'd had bad perceptions before, but now he also had a bad first impression with MMA fans. So yeah, I don't see him being cut anytime soon. And I think that there's some potential there. I think there's some intrigue as well around how he can develop, because yeah, he's green, but you can also see a lot of promise there for a guy that really hasn't been fighting very long and has, enormous athletic ability. So, I mean, I think there's some intrigue there, but I think he's going to be, pretty strong villain throughout the course of his UFC tenure.
Well, and they do love villains in UFC. They love their John Joneses and their Conor McGregors. So those guys, the more they're hated, the more they seem to get the spotlight, whether people think they deserve it or not. So Greg Hardy may get it as well, although I sincerely hope it's not a co-main event again, because honestly, both of these guys, I won't say either one of them is more at fault of this than the other, but both of these guys were the not ready for primetime players, because after the end of that first round, they were both huffing and puffing. Maybe Hardy a little more than Crowder, but it just, looking at the two of them, I was like, you guys are the opening fight on a Cage Fighting Fury card. You're not the co-main event of a UFC card.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I think that certainly they weren't at the same level of competition as a lot of the other people on the show. They were put in the position they were because of the novelty of the fact that, it's this former NFL player and a star NFL player at that. So that was essentially the reason for it. It didn't, when they did the same thing with CM Punk, put him in very prominent positions, I thought it was more embarrassing, because with Punk, it was such a low level of fighting that I thought it sort of came across as like, celebrity, it just came across as a joke. As much as I love CM Punk, it's just the facts. But with Greg Hardy, it did not strike me as a joke. I thought that he was a lower level than the other people on the show, but and maybe I'm the minority on this, he struck me as somebody that could be a factor if you give him a few more years of this thing, and could be a legit dangerous fighter. And, somebody like that has more to offer than than other fighters, and I think it's easier to justify putting them in a prominent position. Just like, they've done that with various fighters that are sort of more of a novelty for one reason or another. Whether it's Sage Northcutt or Paige Van Zandt or some of the fighters from different regions that they've sort of focused on because they're thought to be thought to be a hope for a certain region where they're trying to build up MMA as much as they can.
Like booking Alessio Sakara in Italy every time Bellator goes there.
Yeah, that absolutely fits into it. Although with UFC, at least, they tend to do that sort of thing with fighters that are on the rise, with the hope that they'll evolve into it. Whereas with Sakara, we sort of know what he is, so it's just sort of like, here's a guy with a name that happens to be from this area. I give UFC a little bit more credit in that regard, just because it tends to be sort of a developmental thing, which I get more than, just sort of focusing on not particularly good fighters just because they happen to be from the region. Not that it's the end of the world, but you watch those shows and it's like, it's Alessio Sakara. Why should I care?
Well, I will say there was some reason to care about Greg Hardy, whether or not you like his past, because as you said, there were things in the fight where I thought if he was not in this position and was given more time to develop into a fighter, there's some potential there, because honestly, if he wasn't fighting somebody as experienced as Alan Crowder, he probably could have overwhelmed him in that first 30 seconds with that flurry that he brought out. But then Alan Crowder had the sense and wherewithal to avoid him, to cover up, and to weather the storm until Greg Hardy started to get tired. So he needed to be in there with, honestly, a less experienced opponent if he was really going to shine.
And even taking that into account, I thought that he won the first round. I did think that he was tiring, but it wasn't the sort of exhaustion, I have nothing left, level of tired that we've seen from certain fighters in the past. So I didn't view it as like a fait accompli that he was going to lose this fight by any means.
No, and actually the fait accompli, if anything, was Dan Miragliotta loudly, vociferously exclaiming, "If he can't continue, you lose by disqualification." If you're Alan Crowder and you hear the referee say that, are you going to get back up? I wouldn't get back up.
Yeah, I thought the same thing. I put it on Twitter, and I'm glad that I've heard a bunch of people making this point, because I was quite, in fact, bothered by that, because I don't understand why a referee would do that absent bias. It just doesn't make any, it's so obvious that if you say that it's going to, it's going to lead to, it's going to incentivize one person just saying, I can't continue and getting a win that way, that a referee should never say that. And I don't know why you would do that unless you were essentially angry, annoyed at one fighter who had a bad reputation going in, and you thought it. You're probably not thinking. It's not like you're expecting that to come, but it's there's a subconscious, or perhaps stronger than that, bias against one of the fighters in doing that, and that shouldn't be permitted. So I had a big problem with that, and if it were my call and I'm the commission, I'd want a hearing on that. Frankly, I'd want to, or you wouldn't necessarily need a hearing, but I'd specifically ask Miragliotta, and I'd want a good answer about why he did that, because I don't think that's something that referees should do under any circumstances. And officials, if nothing else, I can deal with incompetence a lot better than I can deal with the perception of bias. And that decision to me had all the elements of bias in it.
Honestly, the fact that Miragliotta did what he did by saying that may give Greg Hardy some reason to file a protest. He probably can't get the result reversed, but he could get it turned to a no contest.
Yeah, I don't think he'd have much of a case there, because I think the guy wasn't going to be able to continue either way. So I think ultimately the decision that they made was the right call. My issue is more with the mechanics behind getting there. I thought that it was a strong enough blow that the disqualification was fully justified, and I don't think Greg Hardy would. If it doesn't cost you too much money, it might be worth taking a Hail Mary on that one. But if I heard that, I would not consider that very strongly, but I would want to know why Miragliotta did that in the heat of the moment.
Yeah, whether or not he has any prayer of it being overturned, he should at least want to be present at the hearing to hear Dan Miragliotta's explanation for the apparent bias that we saw. But we can move on from that and talk about Gregor Gillespie and Yancy Medeiros, because I think in the first round, I had a bit of a bias, and I normally like really strong wrestlers who out-wrestle their opponents, because to me, the prominence of dominance in a style where one opponent clearly outmatches the other is fun to watch. But after 5 minutes of that, I was honestly dreading the second round.
Yeah, I didn't feel that way. I mean, I get what you're saying, and sometimes that sort of feeling clicks. It didn't for whatever reason with this particular fight. I don't know why that sort of gets triggered sometimes and sometimes it doesn't. Cause I over the years, we've seen plenty of fights where a guy, grounds another person and just sort of, controls them there and takes, and the fight ends up not being a particularly dynamic fight because of the.
Todd, if I can interject, I apologize, but
No problem.
I can actually explain why specifically it bothered me in this case. It was because he didn't dominate him. Yancy kept getting back up, and then he would take him down, and then Yancy would get up, and he'd take him back down. If he had taken him down and kept him down, I'd have been like, well, then he's just too tough for Yancy because Yancy can't get back up. Gregor's dominating him. But Gregor wasn't dominating him.
It's funny you say that because my pet peeve with fights of sort of a similar thing is when a guy keeps instigating a clinch and doesn't do anything with it. Whereas at least I feel like if you're getting the takedowns, I feel like you're at least, accomplishing more. And we've seen plenty of times where a person keeps taking the guy down, and eventually it just sort of breaks their will and the fight sort of, turns on that. So, I totally get what you're saying in that regard. And
I think I get what you're saying as well, because in the second round, you could see that Medeiros' will had indeed been broken.
Well, Gillespie's a really good fighter. I mean, he's a guy that's sort of been, slowly sneaking up on people, but I mean, there's been enough improvement over time and enough quality wins at this point that, I mean, he's getting to be a real factor in that division.
Mm-hmm. And the thing that impressed me with the second round that turned around my opinion on the fight is that Gillespie became multi-dimensional in that round. He was striking, he was looking for submissions, he got a dominant mount and pounded it out for the TKO. It was like he turned from just a wrestler into a full mixed martial artist in less than 5 minutes. 4 minutes and 59 seconds, actually.
Well, that goes back to the discussion from earlier about perceptions of the fight, because I don't think of, and that's, I mean, perhaps why I'm sort of more accommodating than I might be with other fighters, is we've seen with Gregor Gillespie, he's not just a wrestler. I mean, he's got a really good submission game, and he's utilized that to real effect in the past. So, I mean, I was not at all surprised he was eventually able to do more with the position, because that's his history.
I guess I shouldn't have been so surprised, but I also thought Yancy Medeiros was more game than he was. I didn't think that Gregor Gillespie would walk through him in the second round to the degree that he did.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't that surprised by it. Yancy Medeiros is a tough guy, good striker, but his ground game has never been his forte, and that is Gregor Gillespie's strength.
Mm-hmm. Well, we did mention that the flyweight division might have new opportunities with Henry Cejudo as the champion, where Demetrius Johnson had pretty much beaten everybody once, if not twice, before he left. So one possible new matchup we get coming out of this card is Joseph Benavidez facing the champion.
Well, it's not a new matchup.
Not new, but new title match, not new matchup.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess sort of your, there's a story they can tell there, because I mean, when they fought before, the decision went to Joe B. I thought that Cejudo won that fight, but it was a close fight. So, if you fight again, there's some controversy back and forth, but I mean, Joe B is really good. I mean, he's one of the top fighters in the world pound for pound, in my view. he's also a guy that's never really captured the public imagination very much, and I don't really see that changing against Cejudo. So I mean, you can do the fight, but if I'm UFC, I feel like, okay, I'm moving right back to the same position that I was all that time with Demetrius Johnson, where I'm trying to sell this thing that I know people aren't going to be particularly interested in. So, I mean, it feels like you're just sort of returning to the same same position you've been this whole time with more not particularly marketable flyweight fights.
Perhaps so, but I did enjoy the perspective from commentary on this one about the fact that Joseph Benavidez had improved a lot over time, but that Dustin Ortiz had also improved as well, and that what we saw when they got into the wrestling exchanges where they were rolling and reversing and fighting for top position, honestly, it was more of a wrestling match than what we saw from Gregor Gillespie.
Yeah. And I mean, that's I think the best way to market the fight, because you had Benavidez won the first fight more convincingly than he did the second, so that's sort of a tricky thing in terms of the marketing to try to market this win for Joe when last time out he'd beaten the same guy and he'd done it in a more impressive fashion. So I think that's the best way to frame that.
All right. Well, speaking of whether or not somebody has improved, let's talk about Paige Van Zant and Rachel Ostovich. Was this Van Zant elevating her game, or was she taking advantage of a situation where Ostovich really shouldn't have been fighting?
I think that Paige has always been a good fighter. I don't think that she's not like a championship level fighter, but she's a good fighter. I feel like she's gotten more credit more criticism rather than she deserves, based on the fact that she has been marketed because of her looks and her personality and her youth and all that stuff. But I mean, I think at heart, Paige Van Zant is a quality, top 25, top 20 type fighter, and she was fighting a sort of a mid-level fighter, and I thought that she looked good. I mean, I think that Paige Van Zant's, I don't think she's a joke. I think she's a UFC caliber fighter, if not a championship level fighter, and she showcased that.
And I could be completely out to lunch on this. I'm admitting that right now, but it seems to me like a lot of promotions outside of Invicta and or UFC have looked at Rachel Ostovich and been like, guys will tune in to watch her because she looks like a goddess.
We also were comparing her to Paige Van Zant. I mean, Paige Van Zant is much better known than Rachel, and has been in much more high profile situations. So. Oh
yeah, Dancing with the Stars is higher profile than anything Rachel Ostovich has done. No question there.
Yes. So there you go.
In fact, I will go this far. I will even say that being on Food Network's Chopped is higher profile than anything Rachel Ostovich has ever done.
Food Network's Chopped. Yeah, I haven't heard of that. I was listening to a Paige interview, and she was very excited about appearing on a show that I'd never heard of. And I was like, I need to look up what that is. And so I looked it up, and I still wasn't particularly familiar with it, but, she seemed very excited about being on it.
No, Chopped is actually a really fun show. They give every contestant on the show is a professional chef who has experience, whether they're like a private culinary chef or they own their own restaurant or they work the line in somebody else's restaurant. So all these people come in with experience, but they're all given a basket full of ingredients that they would probably never use in their job in their daily life. Like just weird, bizarre fruits from foreign countries that they've never heard of and desserts they've never eaten, and then they're forced to combine these things together into a palatable meal.
Well, there you go. Chopped.
It's fun. It's like, I honestly would call it the pro wrestling of food cooking shows, because you're looking at each person and they build a story around that person. Like, here's the good guy, here's the bad guy. Who are you rooting for?
The pro wrestling of food cooking shows. I have no idea what to do with that.
Well, I guess we won't do anything with that, because we'll move on to Glover Teixeira and Carl Roberson. And for about 2 minutes of this fight, I thought Carl Roberson was winning handily.
And that is a true statement. You are correct.
But Glover Teixeira is a man that just doesn't quit, either because he can't or because he doesn't know how to. So he just kept on weathering the storm, and eventually he found a way to turn it around and managed to figuratively and literally get on top.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty straightforward. I mean, he was having his issues standing, and so he took the fight to the ground and got the win there. And I mean, that's mixed martial arts. I mean, Glover's a very experienced and successful veteran, and that's it was a testament to his toughness and resilience that he was able to survive that and win.
Yeah, well, there was a point. It was, I mean, honestly, if we had seen Miragliotta call the stop in this fight, I wouldn't have questioned it, because you could see Glover Teixeira just wilting from elbow after elbow to the head when he was in the takedown position. It was like, oh, I've seen fights end on less than what he's suffering right now.
Yeah, I mean, it was he was fortunate, because that thing very well could have broken differently for him.
Mm-hmm. So, congrats to him, but also it puts him in a weird position, because I keep mentioning the commentary here, but it deserves to be said that they had a lot to say about each one of these fights, so credit to them where it's due. And they were talking about the fact that at one point, Glover Teixeira had been the number 2 fighter in the light heavyweight division for years. And now he's 39 years old, and this is a nice win for him on a big featured card that was the debut of the service for UFC being on ESPN+. But can Glover Teixeira really climb to the top of this mountain at 39 years old again?
Yeah, I don't see that happening. But I mean, they got to market the different fighters they have. Their light heavyweight division in particular is I don't even know what it is, because I mean that was their marquee division for so long, and it feels like there was more depth in the division in 2005 than in 2019, and like that's not true of like any other division. I mean, there's so much more depth in the sport everywhere. I mean, even divisions that get criticism like the heavyweight division, there's I think more depth, but light heavyweight, for whatever reason, that thing is just is really thinned out, and so Glover, if nothing else, it's a high quality fighter, even if he isn't gonna, beat John Jones for the title.
Well, I think part of it, this is probably perception, and probably also because I spend so much time covering them, but I think part of it is because so many high profile light heavyweights have left for Bellator, because they probably got frustrated with the perpetual lockdown between it being one or two guys, John Jones, Daniel Cormier, and occasionally Alexander Gustafsson. It's like everybody else in that division had to feel like, you know what, maybe I should go somewhere else. I might get more opportunity.
Yeah, that has certainly hurt the depth of the UFC division. But even overall, I don't think the light heavyweight division is in good shape. Even with Bellator having successfully siphoned off, a few of the key fighters. And really, I mean, I've disagreed with some of the people that UFC's let go. I can't really quibble them too much with the light heavyweight division, because it was largely people that were good fighters but not particularly marketable. And even though they've, Bader has done well since leaving UFC, and he looks like he looks like he's improved over time, and he looks like the best version of himself. Phil Davis hasn't looked as great, but still clearly a quality fighter. They're also not the sort of people that you're really gonna, I think, do a lot of business with. So I can understand there being some, those being people that they choose to let go, as opposed to somebody like Mousasi, who, I think there's a lot more they could have done with him, because there were so many fresh matchups for him, and he's an entertaining fighter to watch, even if not the most dynamic personality. Although even with the personality-wise, Mousasi has sort of moved up as well. So the point being that there are other fighters I think have had. I've been more skeptical of UFC letting them go than the people that they've elected to let go in the light heavyweight division. And when I say let go, I mean let them go elsewhere. These aren't people that were cut, but just people that they didn't make as strong of an effort to resign.
Right. They either didn't match the offer, or they just said, we're not going to match the offer. Go where you want to go. But I think this gives me a great segue to Donald Cerrone, because this is a guy I genuinely believe they can do a lot of business with. They won't let go, and they will definitely match any offer they get, because not only did he get the loudest reaction of any fighter on this card, he arguably had the best performance.
Yeah, that was quite a performance by Cerrone. And yeah, I don't see UFC letting him go anytime soon. Although I think eventually he will fight somewhere other than UFC, in that I think he's going to want to fight just forever. And, eventually time's got to catch up with him, right? Like, I mean,
Every time we say that, he rebounds and comes back.
Yeah, I mean, I've been waiting for that forever, and it hasn't happened yet. But I mean, it would seem, like that would be a logical thing that would happen at some point in time. So yeah, I mean, I think that's down the horizon, something that's coming. But I mean, for the time being, it's something that's taken time to realize. But he's a special athlete in the sense of somebody that's getting up there in age and really put a lot of miles on the body. And as somebody that's a believer in, miles being important, in that, you can be chronologically older, but if you haven't, really put that much of a grind on your body, you can last longer. And the flip side of that, if you are somebody that, isn't that old.
I'll give you the perfect example. Melvin Gillard isn't that old, but he took way too many fights.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, there's sort of both sides. I mean, I think in both ways that the age can be deceptive. But I mean, Cerrone has both of them going for them. Like he's getting up there in years, particularly for somebody in a relatively lighter weight class. And he's also just he's put his body through a ton of wars, and has, lived a, fast life, for a long period of time. And he's looking great. I mean, I watched that fight against Hernandez on Saturday, and, going in, I hadn't given a lot of thought because there's just so many fights, that you don't have that much time to analyze each and every one of them. But when that fight started and Hernandez came out there and he was moving so quickly, he was just ducking in and out. He landed a few shots early. I thought, oh man, this is going to be a bad night for Cowboy. I mean, I thought that Hernandez just looked like he was going to be too quick and too athletic for him. And, that was, he looked good for, and super confident for like a minute or two. And then Cerrone just took over. And it wasn't that he was faster or more athletic or anything. He just had much better timing. And that's something that, you don't always see with older fighters, but he was just able, Hernandez was able to move in and out much quicker, but Cerrone was much better at, landing those shots when he went in and punishing him for those movements. And
Todd, if I can interject for a second,
go ahead.
I think I actually know the point in the fight where it turned and where Hernandez started to lose that momentum he had, where he was in and out and moving so quickly. There was a point where Cerrone clinched with him and Hernandez was struggling to get free, and as he got away, Cerrone perfectly timed him and kicked him right in the head. And from that point on, it seemed like Donald Cerrone had its number.
Yeah, I mean, it was there was a real turn in the fight, and it went from a fight that he had very much in that it looked like he was going to have trouble with, to a fight that he had very much in hand. And it was a great night for Cowboy Cerrone. I mean, the crowd was into it. He looked great. He overcame some early, a little bit of adversity, and that fight with Conor has been talked about for a little bit. And I've been a little bit of a not a skeptic, but I've been a doubter as to that being necessarily the right move, just because I liked other fights better. But I'm getting to the point where I'm thinking, yeah, maybe that is the fight, Cowboy and Conor. And certainly that would be a great news for the paycheck of one Donald Cowboy Cerrone, because he'd make a ton of money if he got Red Panty Night with Conor.
And whatever kind of show they did, whether it was a countdown special or a Road to the Octagon special or just a interview special where they had them sit face to face and talk all kinds of shit to each other, no matter how you would build up that fight, it would deliver. I mean, they could easily break 1 million pay-per-view buys.
Yeah, I mean, that was actually part of my skepticism, was that, like, both of, like, that they're both big personalities, but I don't think of Cowboy as much of a talker as perhaps his reputation is, because I think he's a big personality. People know him, they like him, he's sort of larger than life. But that isn't necessarily with, like, trash talking individual opponents, which is a thing with Conor. And so that actually is part of my skepticism, but I think that's negated by the fact that people are just so into Cowboy's story right now that I think that you'd really have a lot of interest in it. Even if, there wasn't, like, Cowboy delivering this, one particular line about how much he wanted to get, Conor or something like that.
Fair enough. I think we're going to run out of time to talk about the aforementioned Ryan Bader if I don't move on, but I do want to give you this opportunity if there are any other fights from the preliminary or the early portion as they flip back and forth between ESPN Plus and ESPN. If you have anything to say about them, go ahead, Todd.
Let me see this card here, because I was just letting you run through it. No, I mean, not really. I mean, Corey Sandhagen, I thought looked probably the best of the rest of the fights. I mean, I thought he looked really good with his groundwork, and I thought the other highlight, from just in terms of, like, memories of the show, was Bermudez winning and then retiring, which is nice. I mean, a lot of the time fighters don't have as nice of a moment to retire, and Bermudez had a good career. I mean, he was an entertaining fighter. He had a bunch of fun fights over the years. At one point, it looked like he was evolving into a potential contender, but that sort of went by the wayside with a few losses. But I mean, still a respectable career, and he got a nice send off.
Yeah, I think that sums it up pretty well. The only thing I would add was Joanne Calderwood. She was very good against a woman who had been hyped up as the violence queen and effectively stifled any form of violence that she had.
Yeah, it's sad when the violence queen doesn't get to be very violent. I feel like I missed out. Yeah, I mean, I thought it was a good performance by JoJo. She's rounded out her game over time. I think 125 looks like a good division for her, and she's such a likable person that it's nice to see her have success.
Yeah, I have to keep explaining it to people when I try to get into the deal with Joanne Calderwood. I'm like, don't just listen to her, because if you listen to her talk, you won't think she's a fighter because she's so soft-spoken and so friendly and just almost to the point of shyness. But once she gets
meek is the word I think of with her, which is not a word for a lot of fighters.
Right, she comes across as timid when you listen to her talk, but once she gets in that cage, she is quite literally a whole different person.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, she's a good fighter. Yeah.
Absolutely. I want to see her continue to improve at this rapid pace, because they've even started calling her JoJo 2.0, but I don't want to get too deep into that because, like I said, we got to get some time in for this huge UFC.
At very least, JoJo 1.2.
Definitely an evolved version of the newest release. The latest update has been applied. And now we have to update to Bellator 214 because they are finally concluding the Heavyweight Grand Prix.
That is true. They are finally concluding the Bellator Grand Prix.
It's taken us a whole year to get here, literally, because they started this thing last January in the exact same venue, the Forum in Inglewood, California.
Huh. Yeah, I'd forgotten that. Yeah, I thought that, I was just there for the Cyborg and Nunez fight. So, yeah, it's a cool building. The Forum is a very famous building for its, for the basketball, history there. But it was the last time I'd been to the Forum years back for IFL and WFA when I was in LA. It was a real dump, and they renovated the building, and it's a very nice building now. It's, you wouldn't really think that it's not used for that much stuff because it's very, very well done.
Yeah, and all the fighters that live in California that I talk to who are on cards at the forum, they all say that too. They talk about the history, the famous boxing matches, the Lakers, the concerts they've taken their kids to. One fighter even told me he took his kids to see Disney on Ice there.
Huh. Yeah, I've not taken my kids to Disney on Ice at the LA Forum.
Well, that might be something to do, but if you're going to do something this Saturday, it would be watch Fedor and Bader compete for the Heavyweight Grand Prix crown and the heavyweight title.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I mean, it's an interesting matchup. I don't think this one's going to turn out very well, though, unfortunately. I mean, Fedor still has the big name because of everything that he's accomplished, but, I mean, he's a guy that's been fighting names that aren't at the top of their game anymore. And that's not the case here. Here, he's fighting someone that's right in their prime, and I think that's real trouble for Fedor. I think it's going to be a bad night for him. I think Bader's going to put a beating on him, you know, not unfortunately in the sense that I'm sort of rooting for one result or another, but just in the sense that I think it may be kind of anticlimactic for people that are hoping for more.
Would you say they gave him the easier road to the finals then with the matchups that he had with Chael Sonnen and Frank Mir? Do you think they just gave him a clear path?
I don't know about that. I mean, because I don't feel like they put that much. I think they just made the matchups more thinking about what would be fun matchups for the first round, and then let things take care of themselves from there. So I don't think that it was a sort of a decision to protect Fedor, but you know, it worked out. It worked out well for him in terms of the matchups.
Yeah. Well, the one thing that I also take away from it, whether that's true that Fedor had the easier road, is that Bader definitely didn't have an easy road, but he's made it look easy because he smoked in the first round and then he stifled Mitrione in the second round. So he basically has shown both facets of his game that are going to be a problem for Fedor. It's like, if you want to stand with him, Bader's got power, but if you try to be the bigger, stronger hitter, he can just take you down and hold you down and you can't do anything about it. Absolutely.
Yeah. It's a tricky thing to deal with. Particularly when you're well past your competitive best.
I think there's a lot of people, maybe even I'm including myself in this category, that would love to see Fedor right off into the sunset with one more title around his waist. But I'm just too much of a realist, I'm afraid. As much as that would be fun to see Fedor have one more moment in the sun, it's not 2006, it's 2019.
Man, when you put it like that, I'm feeling bad about the way my life's turned out. But yeah, that is a true statement.
Oh, well, who could feel good about the amount of time that's passed for any of us? I mean, we got to feel good about the fact we're still here. I mean, that for Fedor is the thing, you know, it's like, okay, take, if you want to say he's not the greatest anymore, fine, but he's still here. That's a hell of a thing.
You're still alive. Take some solace in that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an unpredictable world. Any of us could die in an airplane accident or a car crash or just any form of random drive-by or anything, you know. Life's unpredictable.
Those are three interesting, choices of ways to die.
Well, I'm trying not
We've
to go...
We've got a drive-by, a plane crash, or a car crash. One of those seems much more likely than the other two.
Actually, they're all pretty low percentage odds compared to, slipping on a bar of soap in the bathtub. You know, it's like, I'm doing the lottery odds here. You have a better chance of getting hit by lightning than any of the things I just said.
Well, not the car crash, but the other two certainly.
Well, yeah, the car crash might be closer to the realistic possibilities. But speaking of realistic possibilities, there is a realistic possibility that Aaron Pico is getting a title shot if he beats Henry Corrales.
Yeah, I think that's. They've clearly are trying to move him along quickly. I mean, they've been putting in there with experienced opponents, and Corrales is a quality fighter. I mean, he hasn't looked tremendous in Bellator, but he's beaten some quality opponents, and it's a good test for Pico. Won in a series of them.
You know, I don't know if it's cockiness or he's just that sure of himself at this point after the amount of wins he's racked up, but he said, my left hand will hurt you, but my right hand will put you in the hospital.
Yeah, I feel like a little bit too similar to Crow Cop's old line, but still, I mean, he deserves to have a little bit of hype behind him and talking himself up, because he's certainly a very good fighter. It's I whenever I think of it, I just go back to that initial debut at Madison Square Garden, because it makes me sad, because he was on the front page of ESPN. It felt like there was a real, he could have really built into something, somebody that like was a name that people outside of like just the MMA bubble would know if he was able to build upon that. And he lost, and it sort of cut things off. And he's still, I think, he's going to do well in the MMA landscape, and he's certainly, I think for MMA fans that loss didn't hurt him that much, but for the ability to sort of break through, that I think was a big setback. And it's too bad, because I mean, I think as we've seen from his recent fights, that was not something that you'd see in I think you would have seen a lot of times if it happened. You would have seen happen a lot of times if they kept replaying it.
Well, maybe it wasn't better for him to become a mainstream star, but I think it was better for him as a fighter to get that humiliating loss in your grand debut on a big pay-per-view at Madison Square Garden, because it made him truly go back to the drawing board and go, I'm great, I know I'm great, but I didn't show that greatness. What do I need to do to show it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a narrative that's certainly been true of certain fighters in terms of keeping them motivated. I don't feel like I have a good enough handle on Pico specifically to know whether that's the case with him.
That's fair, but I do know this about Henry Corrales. It's not like Pico's been given any easy fights up to this point, because he's always facing people with more experience and oftentimes more track record at the top level. But Henry Corrales, after 4 straight wins against quality, top-ranked opponents, I think he's definitely, if not the most dangerous guy Pico's faced, certainly one of the toughest.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, he's right up there. I think he probably is the toughest. And again, I mean, this, Pico's a guy that's been, fighting for not very long. I mean, how long? I mean, it's been less than 2 years. I mean, let me see here. How long has it been since he made his MMA debut?
Well, they signed
June 2017. So yeah,
right,
so it's been about a year and a half. So since he made his MMA debut, and that's a short period of time to be taking on 16-3 contenders.
Absolutely, but on the flip side of that spectrum, Jake Hager, with no pro MMA experience, but a wealth of collegiate and professional wrestling experience, taking on a guy who didn't even know whether he was fighting in Bellator or the UFC Octagon.
Yeah. I hadn't heard that story. What is the deal there?
Okay, on the conference call last week, I was the only one to ask J.W. Kaiser a question, and my basic question was, how do you feel?
You're a humanitarian.
I asked him, how do you feel about introducing a professional wrestler to the world of mixed martial arts? And he said, oh, I love it, man. I'm so excited. I got to thank Steve Coker for giving me this chance to fight him in the Octagon. And I'm like literally biting my tongue and pulling on my face to not laugh out loud at what I'm hearing.
Oh no. Yeah, that's not necessarily a great sign that he knows what he's getting himself into. Yeah.
No, I think if you want to call somebody a tomato can, I don't mean any disrespect to Mr. Kaiser, but I think he is.
At least he didn't make any boxing references.
No, he didn't talk about like a Klitschko fight or anything. He kept it short and sweet, and I had nothing to add when he was done.
I'm happy that there's no 3 knockdown rule. Yeah, not a great sign for him.
No. Previous to that fight, though, we've got Juan Archuleta and Ricky Bandejas, 2 bantamweights with only 1 loss each.
It's a big fight. No, I don't think there's a lot of interest on the undercard beyond the top 3 fights.
I would beg to differ, Todd. I'm not trying to start anything by saying I disagree, but I think Ricky Bandejas got a little bit of buzz out there after he knocked out James Gallagher.
Was that the fight there? Yeah, I completely forgot. I think people saw that as more of a signal about Gallagher perhaps not being as good as he was cracked up to be. And you'd seen sort of cracks in the facade in terms of how he had performed in some of the fights leading up to that. So we'll see. I mean, we'll see whether that turns out to be more of a statement about Gallagher or whether that's more about him being a high caliber fighter. I mean, Zach Freeman wasn't able to do a lot after the Pico fight, for example.
Well, that's true, but you can't say that about Bandejas' opponent Archuleta, because this guy's on a 16-fight win streak, and at one point he held 4 different weight titles in King of the Cage.
Wow. That yeah, I mean, King of the Cage.
Okay, I know that's not the top promotion in the world of the mixed martial arts landscape, but anytime you can say you've held 4 different titles, that's still impressive.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I'll look through the records of these guys sometimes when they're breaking into UFC and Bellator, and I'm always amused when I see those King of the Cage pop up, because for people who don't know, King of the Cage, has been sort of a low level organization for a long period of time now, but because the MMA landscape used to be a lot lower, the promotions that were lower on the totem pole were able to afford people that were relatively good fighters. So King of the Cage, despite being lower profile, had some excellent fighters go in there, including people that were still on their top at the top of their games when they were fighting in the King of the Cage, along with a bunch of sort of weird novelties. Like if I recall correctly, I think that's where like Kensuke Sasaki was doing random fights when he wanted to get some experience. So like I assume they're somewhere on the internet now, but back in the DVD days, King of the Cage had some cool little compilations where you could see some stars fighting on Native American reservations with it raining, and the people having no idea what they're looking at.
To your point, exactly. I bought a set, and it was either a 3-disc or a 5-disc set, and the reason that I bought it was I scrolled down the list of fights and I saw 4 or 5 different fights on the set from Charles Crazy Horse Bennett. And I was so fascinated with the guy at the time for his just wildly unpredictable behavior inside and outside of the MMA world. I was like, I've got to watch some of his actual fights and see what this guy is about.
That's a great calling card for anyone to have, by the way. He's known for his wildly unpredictable behavior.
Well, it was long before the days where we got Jason Mayhem Miller breaking into churches, so he was kind of the precursor to that era.
Yeah, there were some warning signs with both of those guys.
Yeah, it's actually kind of sad, and I hope people don't think we're making light. I mean, we laugh because some of the things they've done are so funny, but at the same time, we're also not saying, this guy is here just to amuse us by being completely lunatic and getting arrested all the time. We want better things for them than the things they've gotten into.
Yeah, certainly, particularly when it's pretty clear that there are mental health issues involved. So, what can you say? It is what it is.
As somebody who has mental health issues and has been treated for them, that's why I can say that with a straight, honest answer. I can go, you know what? If you need help, get help. Don't be afraid to ask for it, and don't just let yourself get into those kind of situations that people have gotten into, whether it's because they've been fighting too long and they may be a little knocked for a loop, or whether they just have an unstable personality to begin with. If you need help, please go get it.
Yes, I would agree.
So, you talked about interest falling off after the first 3 fights. Well, the last fight on the main card, I 10,000 million% agree, because one guy is like 5-6 and the other guy is 7-5. So I don't even know why this is on Paramount Network at all.
Yeah, there have been some interesting choices for fights that they've showcased over time in Bellator, and if there were a smaller volume of shows, I would look into and explore these things. But there's just like one more show, so it's like okay, whatever. I don't understand why this is here. I'll watch it and I'll move on.
I almost think that's the fight for people who get stuck in traffic to go, it's okay, it hasn't started yet. It's like, if they're trying to get to the forum, they can feel good about that.
Yes, yeah. That's a good, that's a good in particular for the LA market. Yeah. Make sure you put something on at the beginning that people can afford to miss, because, with the traffic, they likely will be missing it.
Yes. So, that's our warning to you if you're going to Bellator 214. Make your plans to arrive early. Don't count on being able to get there through the congestion. If you leave right at 4:30, you might not make it.
No. It's the exact opposite. Don't worry about that, because we got this, this random fight on at the beginning that, you can afford to miss.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, sorry to Brandon McMahon and Adele Altamiri, but you guys are the ones that can afford to be missed.
Yeah, they'll be the ones that'll be fighting while you're still driving down the 405.
Indeed. Oh, you're giving me deja vu, though, of my last time in California driving on the 405. I think I was stuck for an hour just getting from Inglewood to Los Angeles.
Yeah, I was a little bit spoiled because I was there a few weeks ago, and I lived in LA for a while, so I was used to and in West LA at that, which is like the heart of the congestion. But this time I was there over New Year's week because of the UFC for New Year's, the New Year's Eve weekend or after,
card.
Whatever it was.
Yeah.
Anyway, the traffic was much better because of the fact that it was right after New Year's, and so people were, at home and taking time off work. And I was like, oh man, I'm getting spoiled here. I'm gonna feel bad the next time out there when it's really bad again.
The only time I had a smooth drive the whole time I've ever been in California was coming back from Pro Wrestling Guerrilla in Pasadena to the hotel. There was no traffic, but it was also like 2 a.m. California time, so it's pretty understandable that even at that hour, nobody's out.
What PWG you're there for?
It was Matt Rushmore. It was, I can't remember the main event, but I know it was built around Kevin Steen and the Young Bucks. They were the Matt Rushmore faction.
Okay, yeah, Matt Rushmore. Gotcha. Okay, cool.
Yeah. And that's where, if you've seen the picture of me with Kevin Steen, it comes from that show.
Yeah, that was those were fun times. Back with PWG in Reseda.
Yeah, and you know what? At that time, I honestly couldn't imagine him being the star he is now in WWE. I just figured he was always going to be the top independent wrestler on the pro wrestling landscape. I figured he was going to be the PWG guy, the ROH guy, the East Coast, whatever top promotion was on the East Coast at the time guy. It never occurred to me that his trajectory was WWE, but God bless and credit to him for achieving that.
I mean, he's very talented. I mean, I think if anything, he hasn't gotten as many opportunities as he should have given the talent level. There was a switch there where, like, for a while, you could tell that the people in ROH and PWG were really talented, and I thought that on balance there was more talent in terms of actual talent as opposed to just names. Outside of WWE than inside WWE, but it was just sort of taken for granted that the WWE wasn't going to be interested in those people, so it didn't really matter that much. But at the point that it started to become reality that WWE was in fact going to go after all these people, then people like Steen made a heck of a lot of sense because he's a super talent, and if you give him the opportunity, you can do a lot with it.
And now we've seen almost the exact opposite because everybody out there is suddenly a prospect. I mean, if you've only had like 1 or 2 matches like Dragon Boy, you can end up getting a top deal.
Yeah, it has been an interesting turnaround. Although we'll see how long that lasts, because I don't know that the market is going to stay as strong as it is right now. But certainly, yeah, right now it's a good time to be a wrestler.
And right now, it's also a good time to get some cheap plugs. Todd, what do you have to plug?
There's no such thing as cheap plugs. Only cheap people who make plugs.
Oh.
I do a weekly podcast called The Fix at pwtorch.com. I encourage you to check it out. It's part of our VIP service. It's not that expensive. You get a lot of quality every month. So, and Wade and I will go a good 2 hours every week talking everything. it's doing very well. There's a lot of interest, and I'm glad that people are enjoying it. So I encourage people to check it out. And I also do a weekly MMA column at SureDog.com. It's called The Bottom Line, talking about all the different MMA happenings that are going on. And those come out on Tuesday, so you can check those out. My column this week was on TJ Dillashaw, and as he thinks about it, and sort of the trajectory of his career and the ups and downs, and what to expect from here. And you can also check out my monthly rankings at LATimes.com, Los Angeles Times. And if you're looking for recaps of pay-per-view events, I recap all the UFC pay-per-views there. So you can head over there and check out the fight-by-fight blow-by-blow results as they're happening. And my Twitter handle as well as Todd MMA. So there you go, a cheap person making plugs.
Oh, not at all. In fact, I will go the opposite and say a strong person making strong plugs, and that's the bottom line because Todd Martin said so.
Yes, what can you do?
Well, what can I do? I can wrap up this show by saying this is Glove Up or Shut Up with my special guest, Todd Martin. Peter H. could not be here tonight because he had a concussion, and we hopefully he recovers very soon and is feeling better next week. But until that time, we say sayonara, and we'll see you in 7 days. Never leave it to the judges.